If the constant change of the past 3 years has worn you down as a business leader, you're not alone, and you are going to feel some relief as you listen today. Our guest on this episode, Kate Johnson, served as VP of Beauty and Grooming Products at Procter and Gamble and Managing Director of U.S. Consumer Goods at Heinz. When Procter and Gamble purchased Gillette, the razor maker, Kate oversaw the successful integration of the two companies. Shortly after she joined Heinz, it was purchased, and Kate helped manage the change from the other side of the table. Now, she uses the same framework she learned at Procter and Gamble at Grace Camp Consulting, her company, to help organizations not only endure change, but instead use change as an opportunity to grow. Welcome to Growing a Fruitful Brand, where we discuss how to create and grow a brand that makes the world a better place for you, your customers, and your employees. I'm Raj Lula, Principal Brand Strategist at Fruitful Design and Strategy. In this episode, I am so fortunate to interview Kate Johnson, whom I deeply admire, both as a professional and a person, about how to lead through change. Kate, thanks for being on the Growing a Fruitful Brand podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have you here. I've learned so much from you in the last several years, and I've enjoyed our work together. When we started, the world looked a lot different from how it does now. We were meeting in person at the very beginning and all of that. And so the world's pretty different now from when we started just a few years ago. And I know that your expertise, one of the things that you do for a living is help people lead through change.
Yeah.
So today that's what we're going to get into. Before we do that though, can you just share some of the change that you personally have led through and why this became a passion of yours?
Yeah, thank you. And I've thoroughly enjoyed working with you as well.
Oh, thank you.
And your team. Yeah, so thanks for that. So the one I would like to share about is Gillette. So I was working with Procter and Gamble, and P&G bought Gillette. So P&G, Procter and Gamble, a lot of acronyms, so I'll apologize if I say any more of those. I've been trying not to. And it was the largest consumer packaged goods acquisition at that time. And Gillette at the time was in Boston. And we had to integrate their North America operations out of Boston into Cincinnati. And so culturally, just the difference between the East Coast and the Midwest, it was a huge change. But then as I dug into it a little bit more, the cultures of the company were very different too. And so I was very concerned about making sure that we made the acquisition as successful as possible, at least the piece that I was in charge of, which was the blades and razors business. And so what I did is, as we put together the whole business strategy for the organization of how we were going to do the nuts and bolts of the change, we also had a whole organizational strategy of what we were going to do. And so that's when I got first introduced to this training that I hired in as a leader in managing corporate change, leading through change. And so that was part of a whole strat plan. And it ended up working better than I had expected. So, from a results standpoint, the company goal was to hold 80% retention worldwide. And the Boston-based business, which is where their global headquarters of Gillette was running about 60% retention. So they were losing a lot of people.
Wow, yeah.
And since we were bringing these people in who had so much technical expertise, I wanted to make sure that we did the right thing for the business, but also them. I didn't want to lose the technical expertise, and I wanted them to make a decision if they wanted to stay or not. You know. And so we actually, through all the works of the team and to include this change leadership, held 100%.
That's
retention,
incredible.
Which was, it really was. It was exciting. It was the best out of all functions, out of all regions of the world, So that's when I became a believer. That was the change point for me when I decided this could be something I do in my second half, after I left corporate. So that is one example of this workshop now that I lead now with corporations all over the world now. Yeah. Thank you, COVID. Now that we can go virtual. Yeah. So that is probably the one I think about, like a real turning point or tipping point, if you will, when I used to muddle through change like a lot of people, and then I was like, whoa, I could see how you can actually accelerate what you want to do during change. So
it's interesting, even you saying thank you, COVID. I have like a little reaction to
I
it
know,
emotionally.
I know.
But you're right though. I mean, in our business and marketing and branding, people used to really, really care about, can I go down the street and meet in your office and drop by and show you the changes on the logos and all that kind of stuff. And it was overnight. As soon as the world went virtual, we were getting leads from all over the country.
Wow.
All of a sudden.
Wow.
Yeah. And we had done business across the country, but it was largely based in Omaha and then a little bit here and there around the country. After, March of 2020, people didn't care where we were based because they couldn't go anywhere anyway.
Right.
And so it was big opportunity. And so there is a little bit of thank you COVID in there, but
I know.
it still feels weird for us
to say that because it was so horrible on so many fronts, but it did force us to rethink everything, right? Everything.
And I think, so that's such a great picture though of what change is like. Even just the word kind of makes us cringe a little bit. It's very similar to the word cringe. And we, we just have this negative reaction to the concept of change in general.
Yes.
And so to think a pandemic or to think the loss of a loved one or to think a move or something, that we just see those things as inherently negative, but they often are the turning points towards the best things in our life.
Yes.
Which is really incredible.
Yeah.
Because that's true, can you talk about specifically in like the Gillette environment? And I know you've worked at, Kraft Heinz as well. And, in some of those big environments when those changes, mergers, acquisitions that are all just headlines to the rest of us, what makes those so difficult internally? Like how do people, react? What is it that, like I said, for the rest of us, just a headline, well, it's some lawyers pushing some papers around.
Right.
But for the people, how do they experience that? Why does that raise up such big feelings?
Yeah, what comes to mind when you ask that question is when it was actually Valentine's Day. I was 5 weeks into my new job at Heinz, and they had flown in all of the leaders around the world for the meeting with the CEO. And I was just excited, right? Like, all right, I get to meet Philips, I get to meet the CEO. And that's when they announced that Heinz was actually getting bought by Berkshire Hathaway and 3G Capital. And it was amazing to watch the reaction, the emotional reaction in the room of people. And I think a lot of it had to do in that instance because they had been a lot of longtime employees and they knew something was going to happen. And they had probably heard in the news or read about at least 3G Capital and what they had a history of doing with companies once they acquired them. And so the panic or energy or concern for that was a lot more, right?
Yeah.
I can't say that was the case with the Gillette folks that I worked with, right? Now I was on the P&G side, so it wasn't as difficult, but that change, I didn't see as much emotion with that, right? But Gillette had been bought and sold many times, so they were probably a little more used to it as well. Heinz had not.
Don't unpack,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So I think it depends on, first of all, what they're used to, and also how well they adapt to change, how well they do change. And most people don't like change, Raj, right?
Yeah.
Most people don't, and that's okay. That's normal.
Yeah. There's my sister shared with me, as you know, who you've worked with.
Yes.
She shared with me. There's this Instagram account called The Daily Stoic, and I think it's Seneca who said that we often suffer more in our imagination than we do in reality.
Absolutely.
And that kind of sounds like that room at Heinz where it's like just imagining what's coming is what makes us suffer. And it's like the change hasn't even come yet.
No.
We're just thinking about what could happen and we're miserable about it already.
Yes. We're worrying. We're worrying about the future. Right.
Well, I know that you have helped so many leaders manage change, which, like I said, right now could not be more important. Thankfully we are on, the back half of the pandemic here, but the economy is confusing headlines every day. A lot of us have had to make staffing changes or, shift our marketing or product sales, all those things to just try to survive the last few years. Definitely some change fatigue going on.
Yeah.
And so I'd love if you'd share from your trainings and from your experience, what are some things that can help us navigate change? People who are leading change.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, as I just said, that most people don't like change.
Yeah.
Okay. So if that's where you're at, that's okay, because most people don't. And I would just say acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Right. Don't pretend. If you're really worried about it, acknowledge it. One of the best things leaders can do is speak the truth, right? And tell people, yeah, I'm nervous about this, and here's why, right? Because that's going to allow their folks to maybe be more open, and that actually fits into the whole model that we teach, that we can talk about later if we want to. But that's a big thing, is first and foremost understanding that, most people don't like change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is helpful to just almost commiserate a little.
State the obvious, right? Yeah.
But I mean, with things like mental health and even physical health, all those things, sometimes we suffer by ourselves, and we never poke our head up and go, hey, is anybody else going through this?
Right.
And then when everybody else raises your hand, you go,
Yeah.
just knowing that.
Yes,
I'm
not alone.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, it doesn't make it hurt less,
No.
but it takes away the hurt that's on top of the hurt.
Yeah.
Of feeling alienated, feeling
Yes.
by yourself. So
Yes, for sure.
yeah, so there is a big relief in just being able to admit it.
Yes.
Like I don't like this change that's being sometimes forced on me, sometimes coming
Yes.
from within.
Yes.
Speaking of that, you've told me that there are 3 different types of change, and so can you parse those out for us?
Yeah, sure. Pretty straightforward, right? The first one is external changes, kind of what we were just talking about. Company gets bought, company gets sold, right? I missed my flight, because the flight was delayed or traffic. There's a change, right?
Yeah.
There's a change, and so it's externally. We didn't cause it, but it's still a change, and we're going to react to it.
It's happening to us.
To us, totally. Yep. Then there's the internal changes, right? We're driving the change, right? I'm going to work out. I'm going to be a better spouse. I'm going to go on a vacation. This is change that I'm going to change my job, right? This is all internal change. Those 2 are pretty straightforward. The one that most of us aren't as aware of is the one that is change versus expectations, especially if there are expectations of ours that are unarticulated, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, if I came in here and punched you in the face, right? You wouldn't have been expecting that. You may hit me back. But the point is, you're like, wait a second, that was still a change. I didn't see it coming, right? And so sometimes we don't even understand what our expectations are.
Yeah.
And then when people break them, it feels like a betrayal, and that causes all this emotional reaction also to a change.
Yeah. I'd love to dive into 2 types of the change. Yeah, because external seems to make a lot of sense. A pandemic happens, we can't go to the office, that sort of thing. We've lived a lot of external change.
Right.
I think one of the ones that has just surprised a lot of us is that internal change, where you wake up one day and you don't love your job anymore and you don't really know why. Can you talk about that? Like, where does that stuff come from? Is it just age? Is it, chemical imbalance? Or is that stuff that has maybe been happening in the background for a long time that we just weren't paying attention to? Like, why does that kind of change surprise us so much, or why is that kind of change so difficult?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, especially for planners, people who have their whole career planned out, and then all of a sudden, they're like, wait a second, this isn't what I expected, and that actually happened with me. I mean, I can speak specifically for my example from when I decided to leave Procter and Gamble. At 27 years into the company, I thought I was going to stay there till retirement.
Yeah.
Most people did. And then as I continued to work on myself, develop myself, get some great training, worked on my life's purpose. That was a big one for me. Then I realized that, it was nothing against Procter and Gamble, but and I got higher in the company too. Sometimes you move up and then you're like, okay, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. But for me, it was my personal development that I gratefully had the opportunity to do, that led my heart change. And I still didn't even know it, right? Until I got a phone call from a recruiter. And then all of a sudden I said, yeah, I'd be willing to do this. And I couldn't believe it, because recruiters don't call people 27 years in usually to the same company, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the internal ones is us continuing to develop and to grow, or being challenged by other people too, right? sometimes we get into companies too, or in places that we can't be our true self, our authentic self. We have to, or we believe we can't, right? And I think that also could play a factor too, Raj. Like we get so wrapped up in the next job because everybody else wants the next job, right? Or the promotion. Then all of a sudden we find ourselves, wait a second, is this what I want, or is this what you want, right?
So, that's really interesting. One of the first things, first of all, I've been incredibly impressed with you since the day we met.
Oh,
and
thank you.
You have done such amazing things, and yet you're so down to earth in the room. And I think that's why you're such a great coach for people.
Thank you.
The first time we met, you talked about, kind of what you were doing in the next stage of your career. And you used a phrase that was something in the neighborhood of, I'm still in the prime of my earning potential. And I was probably just at the very beginning of my earning potential at that time, because everything for me was, I've got kids in diapers and I just have to make this work.
Right.
And so those things that you're talking about of, being my authentic self at work was not even a consideration at that point. It was, I really have to feed these tiny mouths, and then we will figure everything else out.
Right.
And then for me, as I've grown, thankfully I've been able to do it within Fruitful, but my job has shifted several times. My job last year, a year and a half ago, was broken up into 4 separate roles.
You were clearly doing too much then, Raj.
For sure. But part of that was because I'd bought that narrative that I need to do all of these things because that's what's required of me. And then when it began to hurt too much, then I got to the point where, okay, I have to do something about this. It's like sometimes that internal change sneaks up on us a little bit, because the external pressures can be such that it's just like, I don't know, this is what you need me to do so I can work here and feed my kids and whatever. Okay, that's fine. And then we don't check in with ourselves to kind of figure out, is this really working though?
Right. Life just keeps going. And then we keep piling stuff on top of that.
Yes.
I was listening to one of your podcasts, and one of your guests talked about their word for the year, or was that you?
No. Yeah, no.
Anyway, maybe it was Ben. I don't know. And it's funny. I've never had a word for the year, but my word for this year is pace.
Yeah.
Right? No pace, no peace.
Oh, that's
right?
great. Yeah.
No peace, no power. Right? And when you're love what you do like you do, and you just want to keep doing it.
Yeah.
There comes that point where you stop listening to. We don't have time to listen to the still small voice. Right? Yeah. And that's what got you here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge you, Raj, for having the courage to split your job.
Well, thank you.
Because that's another big thing about change, is that any change requires courage. It really does.
I feel like I barely deserve credit for it, because I definitely got to the point of crisis with it, where I just knew that I could not continue to go at the pace. I love that no pace, no peace, no peace, no power.
Right.
Because for me, I thought it was the opposite. Was that power was derived from going at a pace that no one else could go.
That's a lie.
Very much so.
But it's a lie that a lot of us have bought into over 100%. The years.
The hustle culture, the grind culture, all of that. It has made us believe that the trick to success is turning off the voice, turning on, paying no attention to pain, to weakness, any of those things.
Yes.
Whereas it's actually the opposite. You're going to burn yourself out
Correct.
if you continue to not pay attention to those things.
I'm in the process of writing a book.
Yep.
For like 4 years now. Put that aside at the beginning of the pandemic. But one of my chapters is if my knees could talk.
Yeah.
And as a former basketball player and have had 5 or 6 knee surgeries, you're trained, at least our college coach trained us just to push through, not to listen to our bodies, right? And one of my favorite books that I'm into right now is The Body Keeps Score.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that book?
Yes. Oh,
yes. Yes. I haven't completed yet because I'm a very slow reader, but I love that whole point is that even though we're pushing through, either physically, like as an athlete, or mentally, and still physically as a corporate athlete, right?
Oh, yeah.
That we're doing damage to our body whether we realize it or not.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, that's such a great point. My favorite show of all time is The West Wing.
Yes.
In The West Wing, they use this example of an old law school trick. I don't know if it really is, of tying yourself to your chair. That if there's something unpalatable that you need to do, they literally would take off their belt and strap themselves to the chair until they figured out the problem. And I never physically did that, but there were so many times where we'd get to 5 o'clock and I go, I gotta go home. I got kids at home, whatever. And then I'd see that invoice on my desk and go, oh no, I have to send that out. But thinking that if I don't tie myself to my chair in this moment, then that's giving into this thing, and that'll be 2 things tomorrow, and it'll be 5 things the day after. And whereas that should have been a sign of, hey, there's too much work. You need to hire somebody sooner. Increase your capacity. It just I had stopped listening. I'd become so out of touch with what really I should have been listening to at that time.
But then you came back in touch, so there you go.
It takes a lot of work.
It does. But you did it, so there, right? And probably, what is that saying? Sometimes you win, and sometimes you learn, right? Like, so
I love that.
So yeah, you'll do better next time, and you'll coach better, even, right?
I mean, that is one thing that's been really great about the experience, is that now I know what to look out for in our employees.
Yeah.
And I know what I will not build for them,
right?
Because it wasn't good for me.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I love that.
The other type of change you talked about that is so good is unmet expectations, even ones we didn't know that we had. Here at Fruitful, we talk about how people will endure almost anything if it's what they expect. What are some expectations that we don't realize that we have?
Well, this may sound like we're going into couples therapy, right? But I see that, well, with Rick and I, right? We're expecting that he can read my mind, you know? And on a very simplistic level, we expect people to, respond in email 24 hours, right? You know, I work with a nonprofit locally, as you know, and, you know, when sometimes I'll send out an email and I'll get nothing back. Right? And that in corporate, that's not the case. You know, in fact, it's over. They send it to you back immediately and copy 20 people, right? But for me, I realized that was me not articulating to the group, hey, can you please just say I got the email? You know, I mean, that's a small example, but it's these expectations we have in our mind, how my spouse should treat me. You know, how people should respond, right? That we get them in our mind and then we've never articulated them. And so then when people break it, it's not only difficult because we haven't even articulated it clearly, but then, as I said, sometimes it can feel like a betrayal too. And then that even drives the emotional reaction faster, right? So
I have a review and work time scheduled off in my calendar every day, every afternoon, to catch up on all the Slack messages and emails that come into my box while I'm in meetings or as brand strategy sessions. And so one thing I'll do is I'll check those messages between those meetings, and I'll see it and go, oh, I need to deal with that. So I'll leave it on. I'll mark it as unread and come back to it later. But my team doesn't know that I read that message.
Right.
And so I've learned, there was a team member here who taught us to just put an emoji at the bottom of that message.
Yes.
So I use the eyeglasses now as just like, my eyeballs have seen this.
Got it.
I have not dealt with it yet, but I have acknowledged that this exists.
That
and so now it's in
smart.
now it's in my court.
Smart. This is such a simple thing for leaders to do.
Yeah.
But you're pushing to the next thing, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is that person now, their voice in their head is running as to, oh my gosh, did Raj not like it?
Yes.
Not that he not see it, did he not like it?
Or does he not care?
Or does he not care? Or did is this going to impact my next review? Like the rabbit hole goes, right?
Yes.
And so that's a very easy thing that leaders can do, is just quickly acknowledge. You'll save yourself so much time, right? Yeah. Think about that when you had young kids at home, right?
Oh, yeah.
You walk home and at the end of the day, you're just beat. You've worked hard and you just want to maybe sit down and like not have somebody want something from you, want a piece of you, right?
100%.
And where do the kids meet you?
Yeah, at the door.
At the door. And what do they want? They want a piece of you, right?
Yep.
And how many times do you say, not you, but people say, okay, just, oh no, honey, daddy needs a little time, or mommy needs a little time, right? The problem is that they are going to still come at you either directly or maybe start a fight.
Yep.
Yes?
Yep.
Because they're going to get your attention.
Oh, yeah.
So it's pay me now or pay me later, right? But just that little bit of, kids don't need much, right?
Right.
Yes, show me. And they're done in 3 minutes and move on. This is not that I'm saying that your employees are kids, but that's exactly.
Yeah, they're people. They're just like kids.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, my kids, I had one of my daughters was kind of acting out at one point, and I was like, what do you need? And thankfully she's old enough now that she can kind of articulate it. She goes, I just want to play.
Yes.
I was like, oh, seriously? Like, you're fighting with me because you want to have fun?
Yes.
Yes. But so we just started having more fun, and that thing has gone down.
Yeah.
And it was amazing how easy it was.
Yeah.
The big thing that we learned, we took a parenting class during the pandemic, and the big word that we learned was validation. Of just like, I don't even necessarily agree that you should be angry about this, but I see that you are angry about this.
It's just acknowledging their emotion.
Yep.
And that's a great thing that leaders can do in times of change, is just acknowledge the other people's emotion.
Yeah.
Versus trying to convince them that they shouldn't feel that way.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
Right.
Which doesn't work.
No.
And it doesn't work in large part because it's already happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Don't tell me that like it's not raining. I'm already all wet.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Where there's no going back. Yeah.
So, we know a lot of the unfriendly pieces of change. But you've talked about how change brings opportunity.
Yeah.
How is that? What's good about change?
Yeah. That's actually my favorite part of the change model that we teach in the workshop is when we talk about inventing possibilities. That's the fun part about change. Because what I know to be true is that when the window of change is open, that's when more change can get through. Or change begets change.
So that sounds scary though, right? Because it's like, wait, we're already dealing with change, and you're saying there's more change on the other side of this
change that I want though,
okay,
right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is if we are clear on, and so the conversation that we were talking about before is when you made the change to move from your old office to here.
Yeah.
Right? Yep. You knew at some point, whether you had stated it or not,
right.
This was a possibility you would like to do, is to move to the old market, right?
Yeah.
And so then something happened, a change happened. In this case, it was probably a good change because your business was growing, right? But still, it was the window of change. And so now you're like, this change has happened. The window of change is open. Let's go. It's time to go. Yeah. And so that's when the window of change is open. So for example, practically for me with the pandemic, right? Everything, I was just starting my business. Every workshop I was doing was in person, right? I'm just in year 3 of it when the pandemic hit. And then we had to figure out how to do it virtually, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I had no other choice, as did many other people, right? Yeah. But 4 years later, 3 years later now, I guess 3 years later, 2023, last year, I had the best year I've ever had because I can do more workshops now. Yeah. Because some of them I can do virtually, and some of them I still do in person. Right. Yeah. I've had the amazing opportunity to do this change workshop with people all over the world now, because I can do it virtually. Yeah. I think we talked about this in the fall. It was quite humbling having people from Russia and the Ukraine in the same workshop in Eastern Europe and Western Europe. You know? That was humbling because I thought I knew change, right? Based on, I didn't set out in life to become an expert in change, but with the experiences, gratefully, and some training, I really thought I knew change. Yeah. And then I'm talking to people who are in the middle of a war. Yeah. It's very humbling, very humbling. Yeah. But that would never have happened, right? If I didn't have to go figure out how to do this virtually. Yeah. And that would have never happened if this pandemic hadn't happened of the change. I hated it, as we all did, the pandemic change, right? Yeah. But it did open the window for change, and it allowed to create. Yeah. 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 So.
And honestly, I mean, I don't know that I'd really thought about it much before today, but part of the reason this podcast exists was because we were cut off from having relationships with our customers. And And we were having these conversations locked away in our little Zoom rooms or standing 6 feet away from each other in our office space. And we felt so isolated from our customers and felt like they're struggling to navigate this change.
Yes.
And we have some of the answers because of our skills in marketing and technology, those things. And we just wish we could share with them.
Yeah.
And so it forced us to do something that would be helpful.
Had you thought about doing a podcast before?
We had, but maybe not as seriously.
Yeah.
And I think that actually is a great point because, if you had started your business, because you said you're 3 years in, you felt like you were just getting started. At the same time, you saw more change in 15 days at Heinz, than a lot of people experience in 20 years.
That's true.
And
that's true.
So that you are capable of doing a huge lift of work. And that from even your time in basketball. And, it's like there are just these moments where you can produce way more than you think you can.
Yes.
And so I think even if the pandemic had happened in year one of your business, or even if you just set the intention in year one of by the end of this year, I'm going to be virtual, you were capable of it the whole time.
I just didn't know it.
Exactly. But change that was forced upon you brought change in behavior that ended up being really good for you.
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about. It's just that good change comes along with other change.
Yes.
Sometimes it's neutral, sometimes it's unpleasant.
Yes.
But it gives you the opportunity to go, okay, well, we can rethink this a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. I think I learned it earliest in my P&G days when I first had to run a budget.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a fiscal year that ended on June 30th. And I knew each year I was going to get a budget cut, right? So for the first few years, I just made sure I had enough, squirreled away, or maybe somebody would retire and I would change the job so that I could meet the budget. But that was just me surviving change, right? Or maybe accepting it because I had to do it as part of it. But then when I realized I needed to have a whole new role and a whole new organization to cover the inner city of New York, and I'm thinking I'm going to have to self-fund this, right? But now I'm starting to invent and create. So this was in the back of my head. And then I met Freddie down in Puerto Rico, and I'm like, this is the guy I want, right? For this role. I still didn't have it authorized, and I didn't have the money, but that was the possibility. Inventing possibilities of this. And so then comes the time for the normal budget review, and somebody else retires, and all of a sudden, that was the window of change. The annual budget review plus somebody retiring allowed me to get the role approved and get Freddie in. Right.
Yeah.
So that was me creating over here as a possibility, waiting for the window to open for the right time.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
That's so similar to what we experienced over the last year or so. We lost a staff member, and because of that, a lot of our financial systems had to change. They were centered around one person.
Yep.
And when I had to reinvent our budget at the end of last year, I started to realize some unmet but unexpressed expectations that I had of our budget.
Yeah.
And it helped me understand why for years, when I looked at the number at the end of the year and thought, why isn't that bigger than it is in our bank account at Fruitful? It's like, because they would not have calculated it the way that I would have calculated it. And so then that change, which was unpleasant,
right,
going into it and saying, okay, but if we have to do this anyway, we're going to do it the way that I want to do it,
right?
Because I have to live in it,
right?
And now I'm really pleased with it. And in part because I know it a lot better, but then also because it's the thing that I designed with expectations that I had never expressed, but was finally able to put out in the open and work towards them.
Yeah. Great example. I mean, it was painful to go through losing that person and then finding that you had to redo it, but now it's probably better than ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly clearer than ever. You know, we got to the point where it's like, hey, we're going to succeed or fail on our own merits. You know, there aren't hidden things in this budget.
Yeah.
We're going to spend this, we're going to make this, or if we don't, it's going to be because we didn't make it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I'd rather live in that world than live in one where there's just little bits, hidden away that it's like, well, this can go wrong and that, whatever. It's like, no, we're going to either hit our targets or we're not.
See, isn't that fun? That's creation. That's what I love about change, you know? And that's my favorite part of the 3-step model we go through.
We talked about, the sort of different types of change and then the opportunity that change brings. And yet we all still struggle with change. I think we can all recognize opportunities that we've had because of change, but we struggle with actually getting through it.
Yeah.
Why is that?
We resist it, right? I should say I'm so grateful for the people who created this material that I teach now. They're actually clinical psychologists and social workers, right? So it's very psychologically sound. I'm not. Hopefully I'm psychologically sound, but I'm not a clinical psychologist or social worker. But through this training, as I've been certified, what I have learned and what I know to be true is that most resistance is due to an emotional reaction. Most resistance, when people are resisting us, they are having an emotional reaction. A lot of times, not even what on the topic that they are resisting you on. That's big. Can you give an example of like where we'd see that in the workplace? So something somebody would resist, but it's actually about something else. Right. So go back to you not responding to the emoji, right?
Right.
Or before you added the emoji.
Yeah.
They are having an emotional reaction to you, potentially. Let's say they are, right? Not responding, right? And so naturally, most people go to the negative place, right? And they may say, okay, is my job at going to be at risk? Maybe not in your company, but in big corporations. Like, let's face it, there's a lot of people being laid off now, right? And so that actually could be the truth, and that's the emotional reaction they're having, or it could be they still remember the last time that they were laid off, and it's bringing back an emotion from when they were laid off before, or maybe their friend was laid off, or their parent was laid off, right? Something like that. So that's the point. Is that's why, when corporations or big companies telling you the change, right, and then somebody's raising their hand. Wait a second, I have questions, and maybe the leader will feel like they're resisting it instead of just saying, "Why do you feel that way?"
Right. Right.
What do you think most leaders would do at that point when somebody has explained why we're doing the change, and then somebody comes with a resisting comment? What do you think most leaders do, or many do at that point?
Yeah, I mean they would either dismiss it, we'll deal with that offline.
Right. Yeah, there you go. Put that in the parking lot.
Or they would reason it away.
Yeah. A lot of times they'll just repeat what they just said. Clearly you didn't understand what I just said, right? Let me explain again, right?
Yeah.
And that's not what they need.
Yeah.
If we can just remember, most resistance is due to unresolved emotion, whether it has something to do with a topic or not. That's all we need to know.
Yeah.
And once we can help people release that, it's very efficient.
Yes.
Oh, by the way.
Yeah.
Very efficient. So then you can start going to inventing possibilities. I'm preparing for my next change workshop out in New Jersey in a few weeks, and it's with an e-commerce team. Talk about, on the cusp of change, right?
Yeah.
For a consumer products company. So not like e-commerce at Amazon, it's e-commerce at brick and mortar or manufacturers. And they are there's just a lot of resistance from people in the organization. You got to find a new way to do the supply chain, right?
Yeah.
There's resistance from supply chain because supply chain wants to keep the costs down, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to do more SKUs, right? They don't want to have to figure out how to supply in a different way, So, yeah.
I think something that's interesting about that is we went through EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, and one of the tenets of that is that people want to do a good job.
Yes.
And so when we have that change and as employers, it's easy to go, they're just upset because it's more work.
Right.
And it's like, that's not actually true.
Right.
I think generally what is true is that they're willing to do whatever amount of work, but they want to have some assurance that they're going to succeed. And in places where there's ambiguity, and it's like, well, okay, but after we do the more SKUs, what's actually behind that?
Yeah.
What thing do we not know that I'm going to be held responsible for? That it's all of those things, and those come from the other experienes where they were held responsible for something that wasn't their fault.
Correct. Yes.
That's such a great, because in our example of like needing to see that I have seen something or have acknowledged what they said. It's like creative people just want to do creative work.
Yeah.
And so when they feel like they're being held back from that, again, it can seem like the boss doesn't care. It can seem like, even I think one of the impressions for a while early in the company was that I was just lazy, that I wasn't doing anything.
Right.
I'm off having lunch with somebody or whatever.
Right.
And
Right.
like, well, he'll get here when he gets here.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I was doing business development. I was doing the role of 4 people,
Yeah.
to
Right.
help
I'm
everybody.
busy. I really, I hear you. I value you, but
I'm doing this for you.
I'm swimming here,
Exactly. And so, yeah, just that little change. And then we also have this thing now, it's a Slack channel just called the Raj Queue. And they know that they can go to our delivery manager, Ted, and say like, hey, I need Raj to see this and do it before the end of the day.
Yeah.
And only those things get put in the Raj queue. Everything else, it's like, yep, we'll deal with it in a timely manner as much as possible. But if there are certain things that need to get popped to the front of the line, they have recourse for that now. And so they can get unblocked and continue their work because they want to do a good job.
Yeah.
They are
Absolutely.
excellent people.
Absolutely. It's so important for all of us to remember every day people are not waking up saying, how can I mess up my job today? Right?
It's very true.
Yeah.
No one wants that.
Right.
Even jobs that you don't like,
Right.
you are trying not to mess up generally because the consequence of not having that job is much worse than having it. And most people would rather come to work and enjoy their job and do a good job.
Yeah.
Because it's just more fun while you're there.
Absolutely.
To feel like you're more center of pocket, like you're doing the right thing.
For sure.
So you talked about how the process of going through the change is difficult for people. And you gave us one of those things, which is that helps with that, which is inventing possibilities, imagining what good can come of this. What are some of the other pieces? So you also, I guess, shared with, we have an emotional reaction, so we have to deal with that first, and sometimes it's just acknowledging it.
Right.
And then inventing possibilities. And then what else is there to kind of get us through change? After we've kind of imagined what could be, what do we need to do next?
Yeah, well, really, it's taking action, but taking the right action, right, versus any action.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of times people will do if we're trying to get through change fast, right? If something happens, we're not super excited about it. Like, how can I get through this and get back to the life that I know and love, or the work that I know and love, right? And so what'll happen is a lot of people will bypass the first 2 steps and go right to taking action, any action versus the right action, right? But if we're diligent about it, and as we teach in this workshop, if we're diligent about clearing the emotions, right? So that we can clear the plate, have a clean palette, and then start really creating and inventing possibilities. And we go through a whole process on disciplined creative thinking process during that point. When you really do that well, you know this, from all the design you all do here, you are creating these things that you're not going to be able to do by yourself. You're going to need what?
Help.
Yes. And what do most people feel about help, asking for help?
Weakness.
Yeah. And so that's why a lot of times people will just rush through change, do an action that they already know, and then like, I'm done.
Oh, yeah.
But we've then sub-optimized the change process.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and created a mess for ourselves that we're going to have to deal with later.
It's going to come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love what you said about our natural reaction is to try to go back to how it was, which I don't know your experience, but my experience has been largely that that's never possible. I mean, if it is possible, it's rare.
Right.
It is the exception, not the rule.
Right.
We never really, truly go back to how things were.
No.
And so that reaction is kind of a faulty one in us.
Yeah.
When you talked about clearing the emotion, it reminded me of, I can't even really remember where I read it, but just this practice of sometimes when you're feeling bottled up and you're just like, I don't know why I'm upset right now.
Right.
Just literally saying it out loud,
Yeah.
even by yourself, makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There were a couple of times in the years of like a lot of diapers and not enough money and all of that.
Yes.
That I would just drive home and I would talk out loud and just go, I am upset that we don't have enough money right now.
Yeah.
And then you don't carry that home because you leave it in the car.
Yes. Yes.
And I think we've learned to fear our feelings.
Yes.
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 When you can clear them out by just going, hey, this is a feeling that I don't like to feel.
Yes. Yes. I feel vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right?
We learned that with our kids, that anger is a secondary emotion.
Yeah.
That we use anger to feel powerful when we're feeling something else we don't want to feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if your employees are getting grumpy, or
Right.
if you're getting grumpy,
Right.
then you're probably feeling something else that you don't want to feel.
Oh, absolutely. Anger, they would say, is a presenting emotion.
Yeah.
I like to call it brown paint.
Yeah.
Right? Because anger is at top, like brown paint is made up of a lot of different colors, right? And so if we just stop and say, I'm angry, that's a good start, but it's not enough, right? We got to really dig in and say, what is it? Because if we don't release the right emotion, we're going to do okay, but we're not going to do as great. It's still
Right.
there, right?
Right.
So, I mean, growing up in Jersey, driving, I laugh, of course, Rick's from Nebraska, I'm from New Jersey. And, and in Jersey, when somebody cuts you off, there might be some gestures that happen, And when I first got to Nebraska and I saw people shaking their head, like, I was like, what's that about? But the point is, if somebody cuts you off, whether you're in Nebraska or New Jersey, right? A lot of times we're like, you stupid,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So what it seems like is that our emotion is anger.
Yeah.
But what is it really?
It's fear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we don't like that other people are driving, 2-ton machines
Yeah.
in a way that might kill us.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the easier reaction to reach for is what a
Yes.
jerk.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's great. You're teaching your children that, because it's teaching them not to stop there.
Yeah.
It's absolutely say you're angry and why. What else?
Yep.
And that's great. You're teaching that now, because my generation didn't have that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I truly believe, this as I work with Gen Zs, they're much better at it than as boomers, right? So, well, you're not, but yeah.
But I mean, yeah, we all come from a place though that just hasn't had those words. We haven't had those tools.
Right.
And I like that, our country has been without global conflict for long enough
Right.
that we can actually express those tools and be
Yeah.
healthier versions of ourselves.
Yeah, and it's not that our generation was bad. I mean, I would tell people, I come home from a basketball game, and what were the three things my dad would ask me? Did you win? Did you shoot? Did you score? Right? Our production, back to our production piece, right?
Yep.
And that served me well in many cases.
Yeah.
But he never said, how did you feel about how you played? That was never asked, right? Sorry, Dad.
I mean, and I think that's the thing though, is every generation does the best that they can.
Yeah.
And we pass on, hopefully, the best of what we can, so
Absolutely.
that the next generation can do better.
Yeah.
That's the hope of a country, is that the people who come behind you can do better. We get a little resentful about it sometimes, unnecessarily, but we want people in other generations to not have to live with trauma and
Right.
unrealized potential. So,
Right. Right.
yeah.
That's why I love doing this. Honestly, I love helping people thrive through change.
Yeah.
So, because it's going to impact not only their companies, but their families, their communities. It's very cool.
I did have one other question for you about this taking the right action instead of just taking action. Because sometimes I say the opposite about having a bias towards action,
Yeah.
because we can often get in our heads about, is this the exact perfect
Right,
decision?
right.
And we get this sort of analysis paralysis.
Yes.
How do you balance those two things between, I want to take the right action, but to not take action is also a choice.
Absolutely.
And so how do you balance those things?
For me, in the case with respect to change, as long as I or people have gone through the first two steps the best they could, then it actually happens naturally.
Yeah.
It really does. In fact, it actually happens naturally by clearing the emotions. Even if people haven't gone through the inventing possibility training with me, like I will see people automatically. It just your mind automatically goes there when you've cleared it. So I would say it's going to absolutely happen too.
Yeah.
If people are still in an analysis paralysis, when I'm in analysis paralysis, right, that means I got to go back. There's still more fear there. There's still more emotion there that is holding me back from at least trying. Right.
That's great. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense, because I would get locked up in I have to take the right action, but it really is it's based in fear. Or take the perfect action, not the right action.
Right. Yeah.
And I really love that idea that once you clear the emotion, generally you see it in a different way.
Correct.
And you're right. It's kind of just obvious at that point.
Yes.
What the next step is, and once something becomes that clear,
Yes.
it's almost hard not to take that step.
Yes.
Well, why would I stay here if I know what I have to do next?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say go back and look at the emotions again and see if it opens up then. Or you might need more data. Like sometimes when I'm stuck, I'm like, I'm missing something still, right?
Yeah.
But having a bias towards action, I can definitely appreciate that.
Yeah. So it's like there's this funnel of dealing with the emotions and then inventing the possibilities and then choosing, identifying the action and taking it.
Yeah.
And if you get stuck at that bottom spot, it's because there's stuff from the other two that haven't filtered through correctly.
Probably. Or maybe you need to ask somebody like that. I mean, part of taking the right action isn't always you doing it. It's asking somebody else that you could ask for help, or what would what other information that would help so that you can do it. So that's the thing. If it's really a big breakthrough thing, you're not going to be able to do it alone.
Yeah.
Really. Most of the stuff we're not going to be able to do it alone.
Right.
Sadly, a lot of people still do it alone.
Yeah.
Right? And so it could be the next action, taking the right action, is going to get somebody who knows more about this area than you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's could be a little scary because it's once again showing vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Yeah. Kate, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I feel like I learn so much every time.
Oh my gosh, right back at you. Thank you.
Where can people find you if they want to either take one of your workshops or have you come in and train their company?
Sure.
Where's the best place to find you?
Awesome. Thank you for asking. GraceCampLLC.com is the website, or they can email me at kate@gracecampllc.com.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Kate, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Raj. I love hanging out with you. Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for joining us today on Growing a Fruitful Brand. If you found today's show helpful, don't forget to subscribe and consider sharing it with someone who might also enjoy it. If you'd like to work with Fruitful on a branding, website, or messaging project of your own, you can always reach out on our website, fruitful.design. So until next time, don't forget to grow something good.